Hey everyone, and welcome to the set of You Say Maize, I Say Blue. I am your host, Chris Cichon, as always, joined by Danny the DJ Sass. Danny, it's March, the madness is here, we're filled with excitement. Let's just Maize. I'm going to say blue. And the Michigan men's hockey team just blew out Nebraska-Omaha this past weekend, 10-1.
10 goals is impressive, Chris. You can go ahead and say blue. I'm going to go ahead and say maize, and I am amazed that they were only able to score 2 the following night.
They got a little tired.
A little improvement by the Mavericks of Nebraska-Omaha. We'll talk about hockey in a little bit. But Cichon, it's basketball time.
Let's
why waste time talking about hockey when you can talk March Madness?
Yep.
Bracket came out obviously on Sunday. Early thoughts?
Wow, I mean, what a championship week it was first with all the tournaments that happened last week. And the story, I think, the feel-good story of the tournament so far has to be Georgia. We were talking about it before the show. Southeastern Conference, a team that was, a few games under 500 going into the SEC tournament, had to win 4 straight games just to make it into the big dance. They do just that, beating Arkansas in the championship game. David Bliss, the center, the senior, you got to feel great for him, a guy who's been there through the hard times. Dennis Felton saving his job, too. The AD in Georgia and Athens went out and said, he'll be back next year. So Dennis Felton's got to be feeling good hoisting that trophy. Georgia, what a story there. They have to be the Cinderella team so far.
Yeah, and obviously, and a winnable game, we won't call it winnable. They're a 14 seed, but obviously a manageable game against a team like Xavier. Not a lot of size, more with their guard play. And obviously Georgia is an athletic team. They play in the SEC. They play against some top-notch competition.
Yeah.
That's one of those 14-3 games where I wouldn't be wholly stunned.
But then
there's Georgia won that game. But there's other stories to talk about, obviously.
There is, and you go to the snubs, and teams like Georgia get in just because an automatic bid when they didn't have a very good year.
This was a down year for college basketball, Chris.
Right.
There are no snubs. If you couldn't get it done this year, I'm sorry.
I think there was. Let's go to that West bracket. Arizona in over Arizona State. Are you kidding me? That is ridiculous.
But all things considered, they won when they needed to. They went down the stretch. Arizona State didn't. It's nice that they beat
Arizona State beat Arizona twice.
Understandable.
Had a better in-conference record, Danny.
Beat somebody else. They didn't get it done. No real good wins. Ohio State played themselves out. They had a game that they could have won against Michigan State. Didn't get it done. Same thing to Syracuse. They had a do-or-die game.
Syracuse was out. I think they knew that.
Maryland. Game they could have won.
They shouldn't have been either. ACC was weak.
No real snubs.
Arizona State, I think,
here's what I like with the bracket, real quick. I watched this with Adam Wallace on Sunday. We both said the second Butler got a 7 seed and got sent to play South Alabama in Birmingham, we said Butler got jobbed. That's thing one. Thing two is I love the O.J. Mayo Michael Beasley matchup. That's going to be a blast. The Midwest is tough, the West is soft, and UNC wins it. That's me.
All right, we'll talk with Adam Wallace in the main event. We'll dip a little bit more into the bracket.
We'll move on to football right now, and this is obviously a big story.
Not just football, all athletics here at the university.
Athletics in general, but right now this is focusing a lot on the football team and all of Michigan athletics, and this is a scandal. We've seen something like this at a school like Auburn. We've seen this around big-time college athletics. It seems like it's finally hit Ann Arbor, a 4-piece series in the Ann Arbor News. Chris, Professor John Hagan, psych professor, apparently doling out easy grades to Michigan athletes, independent study classes. How big of a deal is this?
Well, this is a huge deal. I mean, it doesn't really tell us anything that we don't know. I don't know about you, Danny, but for me, this is everything that, Mr. Carty's writing in his articles, things that we already know. This is the problem in big-time college athletics today. Either, you have schools that want to hold up to their academic standards, but at the same time don't want to be left out of the loop with teams, that, especially in the South, like your Floridas, your Ohio States, these big money-generating schools. You don't want to be left out of the money either. So these schools like Michigan are left in the middle to picking, they have to pick a side. Which way do you want to go? And this is the result. Now, this Professor Hagan, all that business, if that's true, the university says they conducted their own investigations, proving otherwise than what the Ann Arbor News found. So, we have to find some sort of truth there. But, if that is true, then that's very bad. Everything else, though, every other school in the country does this. And I think, Michigan just has to pick. Do they want to be an Ivy League school or do they want to make some money and we go to BCS bowl games every year? They have to find where they want to go. So I think, this is nothing new to him.
And, obviously this goes from Ivy League schools all the way down to schools in the SEC, Chris. There is a disparity between student athletes, and I'll call them student athletes, not
if
just
they
athletes.
Are that. That's a big question right there.
Well,
are they student athletes?
With many sports, they are student athletes. You look how many of these athletes are actually going to be playing professional sports. Not a ton of them. So right now, let's call them student athletes. You look at student athletes compared with the rest of the student body, generally they have lower standards for getting into said school. It happens at Harvard, and it happens at Michigan, and it happens at Florida and Alabama and Auburn, and you can name any school you want. It happens. The thing that's a little bit disconcerting to me is you look at this situation right now, Professor Hagan's independent study classes, 85% of those classes involved athletes.
Right.
Those athletes, on average, had an overall cumulative GPA of 2.57. In Hagan's class, Chris, they had a 3.62. That's over a full point jump in their GPA. That's problem one. Problem two I look at is the case of Perry Dorenstein, offensive lineman on the football team, who was ineligible academically to play Division I college football. He had below the 1.8 required. Goes and takes this class with Hagen,
and that's what
ends up with a 1.91.
If what they said about Hagen winds up to be true, that is a huge problem, because that is something Michigan totally does not stand for. Sure, they have to follow some of these other, academic, concessions, what have you, for these athletes to let them allow here and be able to compete on the big time stage. But something like that with this Professor Hagen, that is something they definitely should not stand for, and it's something they're definitely going to take the next step looking into this.
Another athlete who took this class, Chad Kaloric, we can get to him in a second right now as we shift over to hockey. Hat trick in the 10-goal game against Nebraska-Omaha.
Right. And remember, he was coming back from that hamstring injury. Hadn't played for a couple weeks to close out the regular season, Danny.
And a game called wonderfully, I will say, by Matt O'Day, Chris Priest, and Adam Wallace.
Great telecast here on Wool TV, as always. Hat trick for Kalaric. 16 out of the 18 skaters tally a point in the first game Friday night, and then only 2-1 on Saturday night. Billy Sauer, at least he was solid for both of those games. Looks good. Now you look to this weekend. You're in the semifinals. You're going to the Joe Friday night. They're going to take on Northern Michigan.
Yeah.
They're not going to take on Michigan State, which was what you would have thought a couple weeks ago now. You might think this is good because Michigan, they don't want to play Michigan State. They're only 1-2-1 this year against the Spartans.
State would have had to get by somebody. Michigan would have ended up playing Notre Dame being the 4 seed, but State still in that tournament is dangerous.
State not being in, I think, is very good for Michigan, a team you don't want to play the defending national champions. You do not want to play them this time of year, but now Northern Michigan, kind of a trap.
Here's the problem, though, right? Let's say Michigan wins this, assuming, they should, all things considered. They'll pull a number 1 overall seed. State doesn't play again. They drop from a surefire 2 seed to what'll likely be a 3 seed. They'll likely be the highest 3 seed. That would put them at a 9 seed. A 9-8, Michigan is the number 1 overall seed. It's a second-round matchup against State. That's going to be a brutal draw.
Yeah.
And that's obviously looking forward. We have no idea what will happen this weekend.
Right.
Obviously some teams.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think Michigan should overlook Northern Michigan. I mean, sure, early in the year they swept the first series on the road up in the UP, and remember in January they came back
3 games here.
Tie games. Walt Kyle's got a very tough, scrappy bunch, a lot like the Spartans themselves, and that's one that wound up beating Michigan State. So you don't sleep on Northern Michigan.
Hey, Kaloric back. Matt Rust hopefully coming back. Scooter Vaughn hopefully coming back. They're going to have to play a game without Max Pacioretty. He got disqualified for fighting. That's 1 game for him. But Billy Sauer hitting his stride. 2 games, only 2 goals allowed over the weekend. And that second game, keep in mind, that was a pretty big game. Obviously you don't want to have to get a split. That game very well could have gone to overtime. Some great offense from Nebraska-Omaha. Actually shooting the puck on Sauer, 11 shots in the third period there. Sauer had to make 26 saves. A good game from him. He looks a lot different than the goalie we saw last year heading into the playoffs.
When he basically lost the CCHA title game to Notre Dame off a rebound 2-1. Danny, we're going to